Welcome in. It is Big Ten today. It is great to have you with us on this Friday. We are presented by Gatorade. Dave Revson, Jerry DiNardo. September is here and football is here. That was fun last night.
It was fun. It was a tough game for both teams, though. I mean, you come out of that first game confirming maybe what you thought your problems were, and you'd really like to do it against a soft non-conference team. So it was a real challenge for both these teams. But they probably learned more than they would have against the soft non-conference. But it's a problem opening up like this. It really is. It's tough on both teams.
6 Big Ten teams playing conference games in their openers. That one is our big story. We'll dive into what we learned. But first, let's tell you what happened in case you missed it. It was the Gophers and the Huskers. Turnovers did Nebraska in. They had 3 picks from new QB Jeff Sims. Still the lead in the fourth quarter before Minnesota put together a fabulous rally. 10 unanswered, culminating in the Dragon Kesic field goal. As time expired, they win it by the final of 13-10. And so, Jerry, let's dive into what you learned about each one of these teams. Pretty unusual way for Minnesota to win in that they threw the ball nearly twice as many times as they ran it. They were held well under 60 yards rushing. It's the fewest they've had in a win this century. So it's a little uncharacteristic of them on the offensive side. Let's start with the Gophers. What stood out to you about the way they pulled this out?
Yeah, it may be uncharacteristic compared to last year, but we expected this, right? Harbaugh and Simon, the 2 new coordinators. I mean, when we were at camp, we talked with them. No Mo, no Tanner Morgan. Things were going to change, and so they changed dramatically. But this is the new Minnesota offense, I think. I don't think it's going to change much. And so again, I mentioned this, that such a really difficult opener exposes you, right? The leading rusher, Tyler, ran 10 times for 41 yards. That's got to get better, right? Yeah. But they're still not going to be Mo Ibrahim, right? It's still not going to be that type of offense. So we're seeing the new Minnesota offense, and it's got flaws. Kaliak Manis, talent, we still don't know him. Again, you wish he would played last night against a team that they could score some points on. So it's a retool with Shiraka gone. It's a retooled Minnesota offense. This is what it's going to look like. Now they've got to get better at their offhand. They've got to get better at running the ball now. They're better at passing it than they've been in the past.
Crazy to think that is now their offhand, the run game. But you're right, very limited explosion from Tyler. He did have one really nice run to set up the game-winning field goal, but aside from that, was held largely in check. Their defense, once again, was really good. And I think for years now we've been talking about how good Joe Rossi is, how good that secondary is. I mean, Tyler Nubin really justified why he was chosen among the 10 players to watch by the media in the preseason in the Big Ten. 3 interceptions, and none of them on easy balls to pick off. Really played the ball well. And again, defense appears to be a strong suit.
Yeah, Nubin really had a special night. When we saw him in camp, this isn't a surprise. They had depth at every position on the defense. And again, continuity on the staff. Joe Rossi's been there. And what Joe Rossi does is he goes into a game like this because he doesn't know Nebraska all that much. They hadn't played a game with a base game plan, and that he's the kind of guy that makes adjustments at halftime. Even if they hadn't even practiced something, he can make an adjustments because he's been there long enough. He's got a big package, but he goes into the game with a medium-sized package. But if he has to change to win a game, I think that's what we saw last night.
And what we saw was what we've come to expect from Minnesota, 17th win in their last 24 one-possession games. And, of course, as has been well documented, the flip side for Nebraska. We've come to expect them to lose close games, and they did it again here. 26 losses now in their last 33 one-possession games. Kind of gave the game away here, Jerry. Turnovers remain a major bugaboo, and Jeff Sims, frankly, did not have a good night.
Yeah, and one more thing on Minnesota, because I wanted to mention this. That crowd.
It's great.
Yeah, I mean, and a lot of that, P.J. Fleck deserves a lot of credit. This is his 7th year. He's built that program. That was an incredible crowd in the atmosphere. Nebraska's what we saw in camp. I mean, what we said in the breakdown after we watched practice is that Jeff Sims looks like a big tailback. And if he runs the ball during the season, this is before the game, obviously, after we watched practice, he's going to be a big load running the ball. He was. But he didn't throw the ball very well the day we were there. And so there was no surprise about Jeff Sims. But he'll get better throwing the ball. It's not that he doesn't have a live arm, but they have to keep him in the run game. As I was watching the game, I said at halftime, they're going to run him more the second half. That's the only chance they have to win it. Now the issue becomes, they can't run him too much. I mean, he can't take a beating, but he's got to get better in the pass game. Defense at Nebraska, exactly what we saw at the camp. It's the 3-3-5 defense. They pressured Minnesota. They outnumbered them at certain times. Really impressive. Obviously the turnovers. We're all watching it saying, please tell me this isn't going to be a close loss for Nebraska. But, Matt Rule, if you saw him in the press conference, he really put it in perspective. First of all, it wasn't this program. It was another program. And it wasn't about what happened. It was why it happened, right? You can't throw that many turnovers and expect to win a game, especially on the road in the Big Ten. So I think he went in the locker room and he tried to make sure that the kids didn't say, oh, here we go again.
Right.
We know the fans are going to say that,
yes,
right?
They already have.
They already have, right? But he's got to separate that from last year's team to this year's team.
No doubt. And I do think it's a challenge because certainly he and his staff had nothing to do with what happened on that, really in the entire time with Scott Frost, but certainly last year. And, these players, some of them were a part of it, a large number of them were a part of it. But again, you're trying to wipe the slate clean. Biggest positives, the defense was decidedly better. That's where in the first game, how much of this was when we talk about Minnesota and lack of explosion in the run game? Well, hey, how much of it was Nebraska? Maybe we're looking at a really good Nebraska defense. Time will tell, and we'll find out. But clearly we're improved there. They weren't getting gashed in the way that they were a year ago. There's some real positives you can take from it.
Right, but now there's a little bit of a book on them, right? The advantage they had, we talked about this when we were at the Nebraska camp, the advantage that defense has, although it's a different scheme, but really nobody knows what the game plan for. So they'll have to get better. So you look at Nebraska, they have to get better throwing the ball, and on defense, they're going to have to hold serve, if you will. Hopefully they're as good as they looked, but, people now get the game plan against them. Minnesota really didn't have a chance. The game planning. Right. Minnesota had 2 new offensive coordinators calling the plays, right? Had a new quarterback, lost Mo. Again, it was as gutsy a win as you could ask for Minnesota. They deserve so much credit. And I love the atmosphere. It was great. It was just fabulous.
Yep, their 5th straight win over Nebraska. It's their 2nd longest streak in school history against the Huskers, who dropped their 4th straight season opener. That is their longest such skid since the 1940s. So that game 1 of 11 this weekend. You look at, the rest of the Big Ten schedule. Michigan State, it's traditional Friday opener tonight over on FS1. All of the ranked teams play tomorrow. Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, Wisconsin, and Iowa. We got a triple header here on the network. Purdue, Maryland, and Illinois all in action. And then the rare Sunday game, Rutgers and Northwestern. So we are feeling ambitious.
Okay.
We're going to dive into each and every game. We're not going to leave a single game undiscussed.
I was hoping we were going to do that.
I
really expected to come here and talk football today. So
okay.
This isn't a surprise.
All right. Well, I'm just saying, it's a lot of games. So let's plow through them. Let's start with Ohio State in Indiana. Let's dive into the Buckeyes first. And I think we all understand what the equation here is for Ohio State. It's a weird spot to be in as a program. You made 3 of the last 4 college football playoffs, but they've lost the rivalry game the last 2 years. They haven't won the Big Ten the last 2 years. There's expectations heaped on this team, yet there are a lot of unknowns, I think, as they come into this game with Indiana. So let's focus on the Buckeyes first. What are you going to be interested in seeing tomorrow?
Right, more questions about Ohio State than we've had, I think, in a long time. Okay, so I'm going to start on offense. Offensive line has to be rebuilt. I think they have 2 returning starters. What bothers me a lot about the offensive line is the Joe Moore Award that's become a really popular award in college football. football for the best offensive line in the country. We don't hear about Ohio State year in and year out. By way of example, Illinois was a semifinalist last year. So I think the offensive line has to be rebuilt, and it's got to come back stronger than ever. Obviously, at quarterback, there's a quarterback battle. So I think those are the two obvious things on offense. On defense, Jim Knowles, I love what I read about how a coach grows. There's an article that he spoke where he said, we've made some mistakes. I can't be set in my ways. I have to change. Because this constantly reminded me of Don Brown, right? Don Brown at Michigan, if you looked at him statistically, if you looked at all the games they played, they were top-ranked defense in the conference. If you looked at the games they had to win, they weren't in the top. And the same thing could be true with Ohio State if, in fact, they don't change. Jim Knowles and Coach Day and I talked about this a long time. Coach Day's totally confident that they're going to make the needed changes scheme-wise on defense. And so those are the three things: offensive line, quarterback, and scheme.
Got gashed in those big games, no doubt. And I don't know whether we'll be able to gauge the degree to which they've improved in this game tomorrow, because let's face it, Indiana has some real challenges offensively, including trying to find a new quarterback. This was not a good offense last year. I guess I'm interested in how you think Indiana approaches this game, right? They were in the bottom 5 in the country in time of possession last year. And it feels to me like their formula to keep it close against Ohio State, which they have done on occasion, despite the fact that this is the longest active winning streak one program against another in the country. The formula to keep this close is to try to run the ball and move the ball. And we saw teams have success running at Ohio State last year. So in your mind, is that the formula for Indiana here?
Well, no one who's ever coached in Indiana thinks this is a good game. Okay, just
speaking from experience.
Okay. Well, it's a good game for Ohio State, right? They get to prepare for a conference game, and they can sell that, and and you could go in, be flat, and get beat by Indiana. I mean, that's what Ohio State's selling. Indiana's got obviously an uphill battle. We'll say this about the offense. To your question, this is the second year Walt Bell has been there, right? So it's much different than a year ago, aside from the opponent. If it was a different opponent, this would certainly be different. So I think he's probably tweaked the offense to be more like it can be, because based on personnel, portal guys. It's going to look a little bit different on offense. So I think that's true. Tom Allen getting out of the defensive play calling, so he can solve some problems if they arise on both sides of the ball. So, but again, it's an uphill battle against a really good Ohio State team. Time of possession might be something. I would guess Walt will probably try to slow it down instead of speeding it up. Right. It's all the natural things that if Indiana's going to win the game, they're going to have to get help from a really good opponent.
So conference game there, non-conference game for each of the other two top East contenders. Let's start with Michigan. We all know the interesting sidebar here, of course, that Jim Harbaugh is not coaching this game and will not coach the next two either. Jesse Minter is the head coach for this particular game, taking on East Carolina, which if you look through their non-conference schedule, is probably their most challenging game. The fact of the matter is a very low bar. But still, what interests you about Michigan, the two-time defending Big Ten champs?
Well, probably the most talented team we saw on the tour. I mean, just strong, physical, certainly the most physical team that we saw on the tour. The coaching thing's interesting. Jim Harbaugh is going to be a practice. If I had a choice to take a suspension, whether I would miss the game or miss practice, I'd rather miss the game if I'm the head coach, right? He manages the week. He gets them ready. The biggest story to me is Sharon Moore, who's the play caller. He's not going to be at the game. So to me, that's the more difficult part of this penalty. Jesse Minter will manage the game, but I'm sure he'll have help from everybody. But we didn't see any tougher team on the tour. We didn't see any team that had more depth. I mean, Penn State and Ohio State's right there. You can lump the three of those together. This is what, 17 camps we've been to or whatever. It's been 16 or 17 years. This was the most impressive Michigan team that we've seen in August, in my opinion.
Yeah, and they've been really impressive.
And they've been in the playoffs.
In the regular season.
I mean, it's Ohio State when Urban was there, right? I mean, this is what we do. You see the practice and you just say, wow.
Yes.
They have separated themselves from everybody else.
And that's how you measure them. You measure them, are they a playoff team? Are they a national championship contender? I know that was a resounding yes for you. Ohio State is measured that way. Michigan is measured that way. Do we need to measure Penn State that way? Like as you watch them, and again, they're getting ready for this border war game, a renewal of what used to be an annual series with West Virginia. They haven't played on a year-to-year basis, haven't played at all since Penn State joined the Big Ten, but pretty cool to have this game back. But just looking at Penn State from camp, I know the three of us came away really, really impressed. Are they on the same plane, in your opinion? And what can you learn tomorrow about them that might help you gauge that?
Yeah, I think those three teams are on the same plane: Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State. I think Michigan's probably the most talented. But this is where the intangibles come in, right? This is where turnovers could be the difference. I look at that Penn State team. They only lost to Ohio State and Michigan last year. They haven't won the Big Ten championship last time a couple years ago when they won the game in Indianapolis. But this is a highly motivated team. You know, as much changes as there's been in college football, I got to tell you, you still go to practice, you still see highly motivated, skilled guys, totally cool guys, great people playing this game. If I'm Penn State, I want to win the championship. I mean, obviously, that's a dumb statement, but it's more obvious this year than ever. So I think that is going to have a highly motivated Penn State team every week. How Drew Aller plays, we know, is going to be a big part of it. And so, yeah, I would lump those three together, saying that the difference is going to be something intangible, emotional. Can Michigan win it 3 years in a row? Yeah, of course they can. But is there any complacency in the locker room? Are there distractions? You know, can Ohio – they all have something, right? Ohio State, new quarterback, better offensive line, no big plays on defense. Michigan has complacency to deal with it now. Coaches coming and going on game day. And Penn State, to me, is the team that has the most to gain, the most highly motivated, because I believe with NIL and all this other stuff, I still want to win a championship. And if I'm a player, I would give up, maybe not all the money, but I'd give up some of the money to win a championship. That's still very important to young people.
Well, you're trying to be a part of what has been a great history at Penn State, and now can you, as you launch yourself into this college football playoff era, it's going to be 12 teams starting next year, but can you be in that conversation year in and year out? And speaking of the history at Penn State, we've got a great feature coming your way on Big Ten Tailgate tomorrow. Abdul Carter, part of that history, part of that present, the number 11 jersey for the linebackers at Penn State.
That 11 just felt like home to me. As soon as I touched it, I just heard Stick City, and it just made me excited.
That 11 became a constant reminder to me, and then as it continued to go from generation to generation, it has morphed and has evolved and continued to grow in terms of what that greatness looks like.
We look up in the student section and they got Stick City banner sitting right there, and that just shows the history of it and how much the number 11 means to Penn State.
It's not just a number, you know, it's a standard you got to live up to. You know, when you got the sticks on, you have to play to that standard.
Okay, you can see that full feature tomorrow on Tailgate. It's all time for our big stat, brought to you by Gatorade. Michigan State and Central Michigan tonight. Spartans will look to continue their dominance over the MAC. 15 straight wins by an average of nearly 4 touchdowns per game. The last MAC team to beat the Spartans, CMU, in 2009. And again, that is the team they play this evening. A disappointing year last year, I think we can all agree, for Michigan State. What do you want to see tonight that might give you some confidence that it won't be a repeat this season?
I tell you, going to practice gave you a little bit of confidence that it won't. I mean, it was pretty intense. You know, Mel doesn't smile a lot, except after a win as it is, but he was pretty straightforward. There was a sense of urgency in the practice. There was really good competition. You know, I think the league this year is a small top, a small bottom, and a big middle. Michigan State's obviously in that middle for me. To me, they were the biggest positive surprise of the 14 schools. They were better than I anticipated, so I think they're in good shape. The game tonight is typical. Central Michigan, you didn't recruit me. You know, I'm at the MAC school, you're at a Big Ten school. So it's a good rivalry. It's a good game. You know, I've coached in that state. It's important to both schools. I think it's important for Central to get off to a good start. Whether Hauser or Kim starts, we don't know. I mean, we go to one practice. The one practice I was at, I thought Hauser threw the ball that particular day a little bit better than Kim. But I can remember doing a spring game 2 or 3 years ago, and way back then, Mel was always talking about Noah Kim. He's always been excited about him. But I have to tell you, Reverend, there was a sense of urgency at that practice, and there was no messing around. They did a great job coaching special teams. It was really impressive. They are hurt from last year. I mean, I talk about Penn State's motivation to win the whole thing. I put this team in the same category. Highly motivated coaches and young people to get better. That's how I felt leaving that practice.
It wasn't a great Central Michigan team last year, but they were pretty good defensively, and they returned a lot of that production really high in terms of tackles for loss nationally, and so they'll put some pressure
no doubt
on the quarterback, and we'll learn how good those QBs are, and we'll learn whether the offensive line has taken another step as well. Conference game on Sunday, Northwestern and Rutgers. Let's start with Rutgers. I mean, just given all the turmoil with Northwestern, this feels like a game. If you're Rutgers playing at home, you got to win it. How do you view Rutgers after we saw them in camp?
Well, if you're Greg and you're getting ready for Northwestern, the players on Rutgers' team know all the problems Northwestern's had, and he's got to say, hey, we're going to worry about ourselves. We're not a finished product by any stretch. And so the Rutgers practice to me was another indication of steady improvement by Rutgers team that's stuck in the East Division, East part of the Big Ten, which is brutal once you get into conference play. Northwestern, of the 14 schools, looked the least impressive of all 14 physically. So Northwestern's going to have to rally, come together, whatever their mindset is. They've obviously had a lot of distractions. Chris Shiraka is now at Rutgers. He's back with Greg Schiano, so they're going to be an RPO team. Minnesota loses Shiraka. They're no longer an RPO team. Yeah. Shiraka goes to Rutgers, and now they are an RPO team. Rutgers is an improved team, and these are the kind of games that both these teams have to win, right? If they're going to have a good year. I mean, the players know their matchup opponents.
Yes. Yeah, interested to see what that offense looks like with Kirk Shiraka. I know they feel really good about the running backs. Offensive line has gotten better.
Absolutely.
I think that's pretty clear. And you maybe try to run it at Northwestern because they've been last in the Big Ten in rushing defense each of these last 2 years. We could go on for hours about Northwestern just because it's been the strangest offseason maybe in the history of the time we've been at the network. But just real quick, what does Northwestern have to do well to win this game?
Well, they probably have to play Rutgers' game and possess the ball and not throw it all around the lot and be a little bit conservative on defense. It's not all that big a physical mismatch, so obviously turnovers are going to come in. If Rutgers and Northwestern look like the game we watched last night, I wouldn't be surprised. I think that's how they have to win it. Maybe who has the less turnovers. I don't see a lot of points on the board with either team.
And Northwestern, 30 turnovers last year. That was the most in Power 5. What about Maryland facing Towson? At least on paper, this shouldn't be all that competitive. I always hesitate to say that, but this is not a Towson team that is thought very highly of in their own conference in the Colonial. So what can Maryland get from a game like this, assuming that it goes the way that you would expect?
They can get a ton out of it, and here's why. On offense, the offensive line is the issue, right? They lost most of the offensive line. I'm scared to death that Leah's going to get back in the pocket, feel a little bit of pressure, and try to break, contain, and not have confidence in the offensive line. So by personnel, by where you're playing, the offensive line at Maryland ought to be able to block the front of Towson. Just by recruiting, right? Yeah. So you find that out. Can they protect Leah and keep him in the pocket? On defense, big plays. All right, big plays hurt Brian Williams' defense last year. You would think that recruiting and personnel, the Maryland defense could keep the ball inside and front and not let a team of Towson's caliber, it would not be a negative about them, but it's two different levels.
Pick 9th in the Colonial.
Okay, yeah. And so you would think that if the offensive line doesn't dominate, if the offensive line doesn't keep Leah clean, if the defense gives up big plays, that's what you can learn. So this is where you're playing 9th in the Colonial. Yeah. You can learn a ton. Last night, Nebraska and Minnesota learned a ton because they were both the same, right? These guys are going to learn a ton because they're not both the same, and they have two issues that they have to get resolved. Plus, I want to mention Josh Gaddis and Kevin Sumlin.
Yeah.
That's a lot of football knowledge in the offensive side.
Some brain power. And Mike Locksley.
And Mike Locksley, who is confident enough in his own skin that he hires these two guys that have done everything offensively and lets them coach. It's really cool to watch. And it's really cool to watch them coach.
No doubt. And you get to ramp up here if you're Maryland. You got Charlotte, and then you got Virginia in the non-conference. So get a sense for where you stand and what you need to do to get those next two and head into conference play with some momentum. That game on the Big Ten Network tomorrow. And tomorrow, football returns to the Big Ten Network, beginning with Big Ten Tailgate live from West Lafayette, 10 a.m. Eastern. And it's triple header time. First, Purdue clashing with Fresno State. It's followed by the game we were talking about, Maryland and Towson. Then Illinois hosting preseason MAC favorite Toledo in prime time. And of course, the final drive, putting a bow on the entire day. All tomorrow, only on the Big Ten Network and the Fox Sports app. Let's dive into Purdue a little bit. First game as head coach for Ryan Walters. He, of course, is a defensive specialist. They get Fresno State, Jeff Tedford, noted offensive specialist. So you get kind of a strength against strength matchup there, at least in terms of the coaching philosophies. What stands out here for the Boilers?
Yeah, until we play a game, I think the story is Ryan Walters, right? And it's really interesting. Defensive coach at Illinois goes to Purdue, a team that's used to throwing the ball generationally, and puts in the air raid offense. I mean, I think it tells us something about what Ryan thought was the most difficult offenses to defend. So that's interesting. Hudson Card, you and I watched the practice. I mean, he can spin it like
it's pretty good.
The best spinners I've ever seen, right? So, but the biggest deal about quarterbacks in practice is unless you make them live, you never know what's going to happen in the game. So I think the story is, how does Ryan Walters manage his time? Is he going to coach the defense? Is he going to follow the offense? It'll be an interesting. He's a 30-something-year-old head coach. Fascinated to watch him. But the other thing is, can Hudson Card look like he looked at practice? Because at practice he was protected. In my experience, what happens to some quarterbacks is if you protect them in practice, which you should, their eyes are always downfield in the coverage. Yeah. As soon as you're playing a game, if they feel the pressure, now their eyes start going to the rush, and they don't look like the same guy that was at practice. So I think, to me, those are the two biggest stories.
And the positive is he does have some playing experience. I mean, nearly rallied them to a win when he was in Texas against Alabama last year. Right. So it's not the first time we've seen him on the field. But to your point, playing against a live defense for the first time in a while, and Fresno State was a good defensive team last year, right, and they bring a fair amount back. And we talk about Jeff Tedford, you talk about offense. They're replacing a lot on offense. Defense is probably their stronger suit, at least on paper, coming into the season. So that should be a good one. In the primetime game on the network, the team Ryan Walters left behind in Illinois, this is a really good test against Toledo. Again, this is a team picked to win the MAC. Illinois had a very good year last year, but there are some new pieces here to the puzzle. You do lose Ryan Walters. You've got a new quarterback. You lost Chase Brown at running back. You lost 3 secondary players who were drafted in the first 3 rounds. So there are some unknowns here. What interests you about the Illini?
This is a great game. I mean, you couldn't ask for a better game. This is a championship MAC team. They've won the championships in the past. They'll be in the hunt for the championships this year. You have Brett Bielema, who almost went to Indianapolis, won 8 games. And as you say, it's not always linear, as I would screw that thing up, right? And so you don't win 9 this year because you won 8 last year, right? Yes. So expectations are better, right? So you've got a change of quarterbacks. You have a change of defensive coordinator. I think this is a perfect game for Illinois. The one thing that separates the MAC from the Big Ten in most cases is the line of scrimmage. You can see from the transfer portal, right? It's really cool to see these teams that dip down in competition for the transfer portal, but they mostly do it with the skill positions, right? So a place like the MAC, they could have as good a skill as maybe some Big Ten teams. I don't know Toledo's and I don't know Illinois' skill level yet, but that gap's closer. The gap changes at the line of scrimmage. And you talk about a line of scrimmage. Last year, Illinois was semifinalists for Joe Moore Award. 3 of those guys are back. And you talk about Randolph and Newton in the defensive line. Yeah, that's where this game will be won. But this is a perfect game for Brett Bielema in Illinois, I think.
I mean, to your point on the skill position, guys, look at Minnesota last night. Corey Crooms was outstanding from Western Michigan,
right?
To start off the game, their leading rusher, Sean Tyler's a Western Michigan guy. So, and you see those players dotted all over the Big Ten. But should be fascinating again against the Rockets team. 16 starters back, a really good test for Illinois. Wrapping things up on Big Ten today, Wisconsin, the preseason pick of the media to win the Big Ten West. Luke Fickell, of course, coming over from Cincinnati, did a fabulous job, brings a ton back, including the bulk of his offense. Though the offensive approach is decidedly different, they too are going to the air raid, facing Buffalo tomorrow. And Jerry, this is a Wisconsin team, the last team we saw in camp, and one of the better ones.
Most impressive team in the West, for sure. I didn't know they were going to separate themselves that much from the West. This is another great game. Put this up right on top of the list. And here's why. So the air raid offense, right? Everybody knows about the air raid offense. You count the number in the box. If they have one too many, you throw the ball. It doesn't matter what the situation is, you throw the ball. If they have less, then you run the ball. Not that easy, okay? So what can we get out of this Buffalo game? When you are outnumbered, you still have to be able to run the ball. 4-minute offense, red zone, 3rd and short, goal line. There's no such thing as simple as count the numbers and run or pass based on the numbers. So against Buffalo, there's going to be short yardage situations. They're going to be outnumbered in the box. If they have to throw it against Buffalo, being outnumbered in the box on 3rd and 1, they're going to have problems winning a lot of games in the Big Ten. So the test for the air raid offense against Buffalo is, can I run it into the outnumbered boxes when I have to? And every air raid offense does this. The late Mike Leach, he would throw it on 3rd and inches if the number said throw it. So is this where Phil Longo and Luke Fickell want to go in the Big Ten? So I think that it's going to be a really great X and O thing to watch.
They have experience of running it into outnumbered boxes, right? I mean,
they wrote the book.
Braylon Allen had 20 more carries into an 8-man box than any back in America last year, and ran for more than 1,200 yards.
Right.
So they've done it before. We'll see whether they rely on that in this new offense. How about Iowa and Utah State? Speaking of offenses, I think there are going to be a few eyes on this Hawkeyes attack and on Brian Ferentz.
Yeah, but there's also a little bit of bad luck here, too, to defend Brian Ferentz for a minute, okay? Cade McNamara is a big part of the answer, right? If they want to evolve offensively, they've got a quarterback who took a team to the college football playoffs 2 years ago, right? And he gets hurt. So how many days he missed is going to be interesting what the offense looks like, because if they were going to change, let's not say significantly, if they were going to change markedly with this new quarterback and he was injured the whole time, they're back to square one. Again, Brian Ferentz wants to move the ball as much as anybody. I would suggest maybe more than anybody, okay? But if you don't have the players right now that you think can do it, and you have a great defense, and you can win by 3-2, it's a win, right? They've won a lot of games there. So all I'm saying is I wish Cade didn't get hurt. I know Cade wishes he didn't get hurt as well. But let's see how it unfolds. It sounds like he's going to play.
Right.
And so how much new stuff could they put in, or are they going to do the same stuff and do it better?
Well, so is it your belief that they are changing the offense or changing the personnel more? I mean, my sense was, again, the offense that we watched looked alarmingly similar to the offense that we've seen for years. I mean, Luke Lachey must have had 30 catches the day that we were there. My sense was similar philosophy. They just feel like they have better players than they've had. The offensive line looked better. You went into the portal and you got some guys. You got a quarterback who's led a team to the playoff. I mean, they're a couple years removed from being second in the Big Ten in scoring offense. It's not like they're completely incapable historically of scoring. I think they just felt like the personnel had fallen off and the line in particular had fallen off.
And so when they were second in scoring offense a couple of years ago, they didn't look much different than last year.
That's my point.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's Brian Ferris's point, too. Yeah. Okay. The fans just don't get it, right? I mean, okay, so you put a quarterback in there that played at Michigan and brought it to the college football playoffs. It'll look similar, right? It'll look similar, but there will be some differences.
Yeah.
Okay. But will it be what happened with Minnesota last night as compared to last year? No. It's not going to be that drastic of a change. But certainly getting Cade McNamara in the offense could be a game changer offensively.